welcome to the Jeff Bullis Show. Today I have with me Lance Tyson. Lance is coming from across the big ditch we call the Pacific Ocean. I'm in Sydney and he's in Ohio in a city called Columbus. Now, I have a slight idea where Columbus came from. It might be someone who crossed a bigger ditch to go from England to America. So, just a little bit about Lance. He's a best-selling author. His last book was on the bestseller lists. He's an industry leader with more than 30 years focused on sales, training and consulting for some of the biggest brands in the world, such as the Dallas Cowboys. For those of you who don't know what that is, if you live in Europe, it's an American football team. And they have a World Series, which is only for Americans, which I find rather strange, actually, when we Americans talk about a World Series.
That's right. That's right.
And he also worked for the Red Gold Tomatoes. I want to hear more about that. And with Eli Lilly and Top Golf. Now, Lance specialises in generating results due to the evidence-based approach to subtleties and the power of human-to-human connection. Lance has had the privilege to consult on negotiation strategies with multi-billion-dollar naming rights for some of the nation's biggest sports stadiums. Now, Lance has also been on stage since the age of 25 and was also very critical and had a business which focused on Dale Carnegie. And since then, he's started his own company called the Tyson Group. Welcome to the show, Lance.
Jeff, thanks for having me. I'm excited. I loved our pregame talk before this to get to know you. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, we got in a huddle and had a little bit of a chat, didn't we? Sort of like a
no doubt
chat. Yeah.
No doubt. I like the comment on the ditch. That's exactly. I've been halfway across that ditch to Hawaii, but never to Australia. So
yeah, it's a big ditch. It's a 14-hour flying, so it's and
right.
It keeps a lot of people away. Sometimes not just the baddies, but the goodies. So
that's right. No doubt.
Yeah. So, Lance, I know why I got into sales, but I'd like to hear your story of why you got into this consulting business and selling business that you have today, the Lance Tyson Group. So, the Tyson Group, sorry. So, what was the call to do this sort of thing? I'm intrigued by the stories of how people get to do what they do. Was there a call? Was it a drink over a beer? Was it desperation? What was it?
No, it's kind of interesting, right? I wish I could say that I have a rags to riches story. I don't. Blue collar, middle class, I guess you call it. Watched my dad run a couple businesses on the ground, but I knew he could always get a deal. I quit. I went to college 2 years after I joined the Marine Corps. And I was not a good student in high school, was even a worse student in college. But the deal I cut with my parents was like, look, we didn't have a good experience with me being in high school, so we're not going to have a good experience in college. So don't ask me what my grades are. I just need a place to live. And I was the oldest of three boys. And so we struck a deal and they said, that's fine. I went through college and I realized that like, hey, I want to go to law school. So I did everything in college that I didn't do in high school. I joined things, speech and debate, government, blah, 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 blah. Then I ended up quitting school right as the wall came down in Eastern Europe because I had a very, very, very much an entrepreneurial spirit. I got it from my father. My father taught me, you have two arms and two legs, good head, you can do anything anybody else does. He taught me that the world's my oyster, right?
Right.
And he said, you'll never make money working for anybody else. And I took that to heart. Not everybody in my family did, but I took that to heart from him. So I formed my own business, an import-export company called, I went out of the way and called it the Lancet Group. I still have my letterhead here. And that was back in like 92, 93. And I was able to win some business. I did so well that I actually won a job with a company that I was calling on, and I went into sales with those folks. But going back to, I had to have a reset with myself. When I was in college, I wanted to go to law school. The only reason I wanted to go to law school is because I saw myself as some great trial lawyer, public speaking. So as I was in these sales jobs that I didn't enjoy, the last one I was in was I was selling high filtration products to like manufacturers, and the only thing I knew was that water ran downhill. I needed a sales engineer with me. I wasn't very technical. And then I started to get into a little bit of personal development. I started to look at like Anthony Robbins' company. That was the time Stephen Covey
Yeah.
was popular. And I had all my jobs at that point were serving tables. So I was always good at selling a dessert and connecting with people. So I approached those companies and then ultimately Dale Carnegie to try to get a job because I wanted to be a public speaker. I said, well, maybe if I can get in and sell for these cats, maybe I could figure out how to be them. And I ended up landing a job with Dale Carnegie training and quickly did not have my college degree, quickly rose up through the ranks by just getting deals and bringing training deals to the table, and ultimately moved my way up, as to sales manager, director of sales, VP of sales. And when I got married, I was leaving money on the table. I was straight commission, so I'd get a big percentage of every deal. And my wife, Lisa, said, you're leaving money on the table. You can't really train for Dale Carnegie because you don't even have your degree. And it was like a college accredited class. And so I went back and got my degree. And then I just kept selling. And then I started to really sell sales training and got good at that. And then ultimately, Dale Carnegie has like a franchise or a sponsorship system, became a partner in the business in Philadelphia, ultimately broke off and purchased several of their operations in the Midwest. So that's how I got in sales. Like I would tell you that I don't think salespeople were born. I think they're built.
Yeah.
I really believe that as a core philosophy. And so when you ask like kind of my why, I've watched so many entrepreneurs and salespeople struggle, and I'm not talking struggle with not wanting to do their job and things like that. Just maybe some tactics of leaving money on the table, not hitting a goal. Sometimes it's personality based. I mean, you got to be likable at some standpoint. The best book you'll ever read on sales is probably How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah.
Even before my own, that's 30 ways to deal with people. But that's the art side of sales. The process side of sales, there's a science to the whole thing too. So you're kind of half scientist, half artist, or so it kind of makes you an architect a little bit. So nothing's built to scale. So you're going to be good at dealing with people, but you also have to be good at the process. Sales can be complex at times, depending on what you're selling. So I just felt like I found my calling. I was good at being in front of people. I enjoyed coaching people. I'll always in my own business. I don't deliver everything in our business, but I always will keep fresh. I love teaching people sales or coaching sales. So that's kind of my why.
Yeah. Yeah, selling's interesting, and I basically started a side hustle when I was teaching. And my first sales job, listen to this, I sold subliminal suggestion tapes to stop smoking and lose weight.
That's great.
And what was really fascinating was I made more money in 3 nights a week than I did in an entire 40 hours in the classroom. And I was sort of enjoying this, right? And I said, and I'm making some money. And that means that I said, okay. So, look, I think the tapes worked. And
it worked for something, right? It definitely did.
Yeah. So that's how I got into sales and eventually moved into technology sales. So
I'm glad you said that because I shared this in my first book. I in college, I had responded to one of those newspaper ads you can make $1,500 a week in the summer. And it was a Cutco knife seminar. And I went to the seminar and I was so excited. I was so impressed with the knife and I bought into it. They asked me to leave the room. They said I didn't meet the profile to be able to sell these things. I was like a freshman or junior or sophomore in college. And then I got a job at Rainbow Vacuum Cleaner. And I paid for my second year of college selling Rainbow Vacuum Cleaner. So I'm with you. Like I realized then that you could play ball and really kind of make up some ground. So I'm 100% with you.
Yeah, and I think as an entrepreneur, you've got to be a salesperson. You've got to be a sales, So, and we were talking before in the pre-game huddle, which and we need to use more sports metaphors during this because that's where you play. So I got into tech sales, but we're talking about some of the important things in life, and one of the skills I think we don't teach our children enough at school or at high school or college is the art of listening. How important is listening skills for you, for a salesperson?
It's you and I, as we were pre-gaming a little bit, it's one of the things that you said that I thought was profound is we were talking about counseling and the importance of, and it kind of brought me back to when I was in college. I was an RA and I had to take a counseling class there, and it's probably where you made me think about how important to that becomes. And I think you suggested, and when we were talking, one of the great tactic is like looking somebody in the eye and really listening. And then we got on to that listening to understand versus listening to respond. And it becomes so critical, especially, because a lot of people listen to respond as opposed to listen to understand. And I have three sons, and a good listener is always coachable, right?
Yeah.
My oldest son, Zachary, if you would talk to him, he is such an engaged listener. He's very active with his listening. He's shaking his head, and millennials, and this is not, I'm not one of those guys that criticize millennials. Millennials and Zers were taught to do multiple things at one time. So they were taught very active listening skills. So you'll hear a lot of things like absolutely 100%, right? You hear a lot. And they're not necessarily great listeners. They're very good active listeners, right? So listening, pretending to listening are two very different things, right? Or if you're worried about, I would say next, and if you are an entrepreneur and you have a complex or a semi-complex sales process, right? You may get away with being able to finish somebody's sentence because you're so passionate and enthusiasm about your business. But as you start to hire salespeople, they have to kind of listen, because if you listen to respond, you're giving prescriptions before diagnosis, and that's not a good thing, right? So I think that becomes important, but it becomes important in leadership too, right? Like it's you got to seem engaged. You got to seem that people, you're listening to your people truly and empathetically, and deeper levels of listening allow for EQ, right? So the emotional quotient, where you're reading your audience and things like that. I think that becomes very important. In my newest book, I talk about the Greek mirror, and the Greek mirror gets into ethos, pathos, logos, and then how you design your message. But you got to really understand your audience in order to design your message well. That means you got to listen, right? So. Yeah. And last thing is, from an analogy standpoint, they sell hearing aids, but they don't sell listening aids. Two different concepts. Right? So
yeah, and that's and a good listener, a good communicator, we were talking about before, is taught. I don't think it's natural. And the other thing too, I was listening to respond there. I'm sorry. One of them was what crossed my mind as I was listening, not wanting to respond, but trying to hear what you're saying, is that you're saying the millennials are very active listeners, so they go absolutely 100%. And that's one type of active listening, but we could almost call that superficial listening.
Yeah.
Superficial active listening. What I think is important is listening to hear and understand. And that is where you check in, isn't it? Where you go, so what I think you're saying, and you do it very tentatively,
right?
Is you're saying this, and this, and they're going, not quite. What I really meant was, so really good active listening is checking in.
Yes.
And rephrasing. And if you do that well, rather than parroting, I've had people talk, like, if you do it well, at the end of 30 minutes, someone says, who are you? I haven't heard about you. And said, but I just love hearing what you've got to say. Right. So
no, you're dead on. To bring that a step further, because I think that's well said. I think it's you can add things to that. Sounds like, looks like, what I'm hearing is, right. And then you start labeling it. And if anybody's interested here, I got it. My son turned me on to these debates by these two intellectuals, this guy named Sam Harris, who's a famous atheist, right? Very deep thinker. And this guy, Jordan Peterson, is a clinical psychologist out of Canada.
Out of Canada.
Yeah. And so they do this debate on and for your audience, so I'm not suggesting anything here. They actually debate the existence of a higher power. So
Yeah.
they do 3 debates, 2 in UK, 1 in US. And what they did at the beginning of the debates, which was phenomenal, they would steel man each other. And what a steel man is where before they would present their part of the case, Jordan would start off. So Sam, this is what I heard you say, and he would build his art. He would build Sam Harris's argument, and Sam would have to do the same thing before they responded. So they had to demonstrate this high level of listening, which was an exceptional, which did a few things. Number one, it showed the civility in a debate. That's number one. Yeah. 2, it showed deeper levels of listening. And 3, it mirrored back. So the opposition had to confirm or deny what they said. And that's a level that you're talking about, Jeff, that like has to be done if you're going to be great at business, negotiation, selling, really anything. And you could be selling an iPhone and you'd have to do that. So
yeah, absolutely. And one of your books you called EQ, Emotional Quotient. So tell us a little bit about that and why you wrote that book.
That was actually written in the pandemic. And it was, what was happening, and since so much of our business was in pro sports, people were trying to sell, and you know what you were dealing with in Australia, right? And businesses are shutting down. So you couldn't show people that you're emotionally detached to their situation, because you could never tell what you were dealing with, right? So you might have been, you were dealing with groups of people that were saying it wasn't real. You were dealing with groups of people that had sickness themselves. You were dealing with people who maybe have a relative that was going to die. You're dealing with people that had gotten massively laid off. And to not show as a leader or as a salesperson, because a lot of people's sales jobs had changed at that point. A lot of their businesses changed because there were haves and have-nots inside that business wise. So I wrote it from the standpoint that, like, look, you're going into every one of these situations and you got to check in the right way. And we also developed inside my new book, and in that book, we started to develop this concept called the read offense a little bit, right? Where you had to really kind of sense very quickly. You could have a play set up. So if, you have a certain sales price, a certain way you would do business, but you might have to get up to this, think about it this way. Probably the best analogy. Say you're a surgeon, right? And you're doing a knee replacement on a 65-year-old with high blood pressure. Yep. Okay. You and your team are going to deal with things a little bit differently, and you're going to be ready for like the person bleeding profusely, not being healthy. You're going to deal with that person much differently than an 18-year-old that was getting their knee replaced. Okay. So you would have to be very good in the moment. And what we were saying at that point, and we really believe with EQ, and I wrote more about it in my newest book, this concept of being able to move very laterally very well, right? I interviewed a SEAL team member, Special Forces member, and I said, how many situations, what was your success rate when you were in the SEAL teams? And he said, mission-wise, Lance, it was over 80%. I said, okay. I said, as you prepared for your missions, what percentage of the time did your preparation represent the mission you're going to be on? He said less than 30%. So I said, what was it? He goes, it was all decision-making. It was all lateral movements, right? So we were able to make decisions in the moment. So I wrote the book on that because I saw so many business people and salespeople and leaders just struggling with what to do, because from minute to minute, you could be going from like in sports sales, for instance, like sponsorships, right? Like Dove Soap coming in and doing business with an NBA team or a premier team in Europe. They were spending a lot of money on brand recognition, but there was no ticket sales. So you just never knew who you were dealing with, right? Haves and have-nots. So that's kind of why I wrote the book, and I felt it was important. So we couldn't be emotionally detached to what was going on.
So this is why you wrote the EQ during the pandemic. So your latest book is the Human Sales Factor book, which is on influence and persuasion.
Correct.
So what motivated you to write that?
There's too many. Here's what's happening, and it's probably my ties to early ties to Dale Carnegie in the past. there's a lot of talk about B2C, B2C, B2B or B2C, business to business or business to consumer. You know what it's really about? H to H. Why do we need salespeople? It's all about being human to human,
Yeah.
right? And as much AI that's being sold, right now, you still need a human to sell the AI,
Yeah.
right? I had a woman calling me in the pandemic. She was working for like Marketo or Salesforce or something, one of those marketing automation systems. And she worked, I'll usually give an appointment to a salesperson that works hard. It's a little bit different because I like to hear what their pitch is. And this woman, she got me good because she went into one of my blogs, read one of the blogs, used what I said, quoted the blog, left me at least 4 voicemails, an email, and then quoted my blog. I'm like, you got the appointment. So then she opens up and she says, I want to let you know, prospecting's dead, right? Prospecting is absolutely, it's kind of fake news at this point. I go, boy, that's interesting. I think her name was Sammy. And I said, that's interesting. You say that. I think you get paid to say that, though. It's in your best interest to tell me that prospecting is dead. And she goes, what do you mean? I go, well, I mean, you work for a marketing automation company. Of course you would say that. I would say that too, probably. I said, a good way to catch my attention, but it's not true. And it's not true. And I can prove it. And she goes, how? I go, well, you didn't use any marketing automation to get an appointment with me. Based off what you're saying, you should have got it. I said, you still need a human to sell it. So I kept seeing these repeats. So I don't think it's one thing, it's multiple variables that I said, you know what? Then that book at first, and it was going to be a prospecting book. And then my team, we start to look at it, and my publicist at the time said, her name's Charlie. She said, Lance, you're with this prospecting book, you're preaching to the converted. And I go, what do you mean? It was profound to me. She goes, you're preaching to the people that would already buy a prospecting book. Who's your audience? Your audience is to people that need to influence. It can be much wider than that because a lot of the concepts that had to read offense in there and some EQ stuff in there. I'm like, you're right. And she goes, it needs to be wider. And then I start to watch more. I was watching a lot of Shark Tank at the time, just kind of watching presentations and, those concepts, those pitch shows. And I'm like, man, 9 times out of 10, those sharks or those investors, they're buying the person, not the product.
Oh, yeah.
They're like, I want the person behind this. So that's kind of how it started to generate, and we start to look at it. And then I think the other thing that's kind of interesting that we took it in an interesting twist on, we spend as much time on the human that forms the influence and persuasion as much as pitching the message. Mm-hmm. So there's statistics in there. There's a Wall Street Journal statistic in there that says, and I want to tie this back to something you said earlier. I think it's interesting. It says, that over 40% of the presentations that executives watch, they would categorize the presentation as boring. That's a scary, right? And you think about how many presentations are being done face-to-face or in a hybrid version like this, right? This is the new normal, right? Then I start to think about it. I go, well, that's important, but how's that person preparing themselves to deliver a message, right? What does that look like? Do they know their audience? So that's where we started to get back into a little bit of thought around oratory, which was taught up until probably 1930. That's what was public speaking was taught through oratory, not public speaking. It was how to really land a great speech in this big, like 4 and X amount of years ago type thing, or I have a dream, right? We start to look at that. So we connect it like the internal messaging with what's going to come out of the bullhorn. Yeah. So that's, and the book's a short read too. Like my publisher gets really frustrated. Why are your books so short? I go, because salespeople and business people want to read them. So they're more apt to go into an airport and grab a thinner book than a thicker book. So a lot of pictures too. I like a lot of pictures.
Yeah. Well, I think, there's a lot of what I call, they've got to write 300 pages or they've got to write 280, whatever it is. It's like this formulaic approach to book writing, and you've got to hit 50,000 words, whatever it is, right?
Mine's 30 and $130 page wise, so get over it. There we go. So
my book, Blogging the Smart Way, which I wrote in 2012, was 30,000 words, about 100 pages. One of my favorite authors is Stephen Pressfield. who wrote one of just this fantastic book called The War of Art.
Love that book.
Oh,
Love that book. It's sitting on my shelf. Love that book. Great book.
I've read it more than once.
It is worth the read several times.
And just the craft craft of writing, watching Stephen Pressfield. And I saw an interview by Tim Ferriss actually a few weeks ago, and he talked about a story about how he was writing in the woods, and a cat, this random cat came up, stray cat, and the cat wouldn't let him feed it, which was a real sort of like, I'm so independent, I don't need you human to feed me. And Stephen Pressfield, I think, was 53, and he said, you know what? If a cat can be independent, so can I. So, because the reality is that he was searching for sharing his gift with the world, which is being paid as a writer and to be independent. And it took him to the age of 53 to actually start to be independent as a writer. And I went, wow. I've lost your voice.
I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. I wanted to hear what you were saying there, because that book had a profound effect on me, and I didn't know Tim had interviewed him, so I was at the last couple of weeks. I'm definitely
just recently, within the last 12 months. So
okay, I got to look at that. I must have missed that somehow. I'm a big Tim Ferriss fan.
It's just so am I. He inspired me to start writing and start my blog in 2009. Tim Ferriss, one of the inspirations was Tim Ferriss. Another one was David Meerman Scott, who wrote the New Rules of Marketing and PR. I don't know if you read that book, but that was
David
Meerman Scott.
Merriman Scott. Okay, Merriman Scott.
He introduced helped validate and also promote the idea of inbound marketing when he was working, especially with HubSpot, which basically became also coined today content marketing.
Right.
Where 60% of the selling is done by content before you maybe start the prospecting.
True.
Yeah. But I just, that was some of the inspirations for me to get me going. So you mentioned too, let's go back to, because you do a lot of sales consulting, you've also negotiated big deals for stadiums, and you use an approach to team development for sales, and the framework you use is assess, design, train, and coach. And tell us a bit about that approach to sales that I think our listeners need to understand, because every entrepreneur is going to be trying to sell a deal. So can you take us quickly through that? What is the best systematized approach to sales?
So assess, design, train, coach. So that process we use to do a deep dive into an organization's business. So if we were going to, for instance, let's pick something obscure. If we were talking to Peloton, and Peloton was struggling to sell their bikes, once they got a lead in, we would assess kind of the process and then design and then execute, training, coach for people. That's our approach there. The sales process we teach is very simple. It's 6 steps. And it's a viewpoint. If you're listening, just kind of think of this analogy. If you go to a doctor or a dentist or a hospital, or say you had to get your shoulder replaced, right? Mm-hmm. What would happen is you would connect with a doctor that you felt comfortable with or you were recommended to. So that the connect would be the first step. You would go down and sit with that doctor. So say it was your labrum that you were getting fixed, and that doctor would evaluate you, right? It would evaluate your current situation, your health, your heart rate, blood pressure, everything, your age, your demographic. They would evaluate, and then they would diagnose. And a diagnose would be their best guess estimate to what your situation is. And you're listening here, you're going, all right, Lance, that's fair. And now what we know about law and medicine is everybody says follow the science. My thing is if it's follow the science, then why do they call it a practice, right? So that's always my argument, because you may have two doctors that prescribe different methods to get. Some might prescribe you don't need surgery. Some might prescribe you don't need medicine. You know, you need PT, whatever it is. They're all going to come up with a variation. So it's that doctor's best estimate and diagnosis. So they're going to prescribe something. Once you get a prescription, you'll dialogue, go back and forth, right? And then they'll close or bring it down for a landing. Our argument is most sales processes, whether it's a semi-complex or complex sales process, probably follows that trend at some level. If you went in to buy a new iPhone, they would evaluate, do you have an old, are you an Apple person? You're not. What do you have before this? Do you have an Android? What are you looking for? So it looks like you need this. Here, let me show you this iPhone 13. Here are the storage, here are the costs, blah, blah, blah. Here's the plan, close. Even if you went into to buy a phone, you'd probably follow that. It's reasonable to say if you bought a car, you'd probably follow that. If you were selling software, like we were talking about, Mr. Merriman, or Mr. Scott, excuse me, Merriman Scott, if he was selling HubSpot, right, he would probably go into a company and sell it a very similar way. Now that process might be very elongated as opposed to the iPhone process. Either way, that's the sales talk that happens today. If somebody buys something online, I would make, or like you said, that inbound piece, those people are connecting and evaluating and starting to diagnose their issue. And then there's a call to action, which gets the next part of the funnel. So when we do go in, we teach a version of that. And we find that analogy people really, that makes sense to them because they experience it at some level. And I talk extensively about that in my book, Selling is an Away Game. I lay out the whole process there. And when we introduce that to a software company or a sports team, now, when you're selling a big partnership deal, you are literally following that process. Now, it's fair to argue that might be several steps. You'd have to identify the companies. You would probably have to evaluate and get in a first meeting where you'd evaluate and diagnose, or do just other words for that are discovery, needs assessment, opportunity analysis. Then you'd have a second meeting, a pitch meeting, and then they'd come back and they haggle with you or try to negotiate or throw out objections. Then you close. That might be 5 months. That might be a year.
Yeah.
Doesn't really much matter. So that's what we prescribe. But our approach is assess, design, train, coach.
Right.
That's our approach.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned too, I think a really important thing, that B2B versus B2C, at the end of the day, it's human to human.
Right. It is. The salesperson is the equation. They are the factor.
Yeah. So from that, then, one of the most powerful ways to connect with another human is to tell a story, and then make a point.
Yep.
Because by telling a story, you are connecting with them from the heart rather than just the mind. And you just talked about oratory before, which was, when I started doing presentations, they're all about facts and figures. And I realized that I was going to put people to sleep really quickly if I did that. How important do you think it is in the art and science of selling? How important is storytelling?
So some would argue that stories are actually part of the human experience. I mean, it probably goes back
millennia
to sitting around the campfire, on any continent that we've been on in our prehistoric days, that we told stories. That's how we shared history. Yep. It's part of us. If you've watched TikTok at all, right? I'll sometimes hit a TikTok, and what's usually good about that is story. Now, let's look at stories for a second. Every great story has drama and conflict, right? Now in America, this new Top Gun is out. There's some conflict in there as an individual, conflict between countries, and there's drama, and then there's a solution or a call to action, right? I think that's in our DNA. I think salespeople now have been taught so much to share facts and figures. I would just say, and simply put, stories sell, facts tell. What's your job? Your job to tell somebody something? Your job is to sell something. Yeah. People buy a story. Yeah. And then let's take that a step further, because I think you hit on something there. A story humanizes the experience.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think Daniel Pink said to sell is human, right?
Mm-hmm.
That humanizes the experience. So like storytelling, and now there's versions of storytelling. Like a good metaphor is kind of a story, a good analogy. And back to my Dale Carnegie days, Dale Carnegie always taught a concept of incident action benefit. He called it the magic formula, right? Share an incident, put people right there. There I was on the phone, blah, 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 blah. And you tell 80% of it, you're telling the story. And then the action I would have you take is X, and here's the benefit if you do it,
Mm.
right? So like you can really structure a story to persuade people to do something or to influence them to take action,
Yeah.
whatever you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. And Russell Brunson made it clear for me. He said, "Tell a story, make a point." So
Agreed, 100%.
in fact, selling can be almost summed up as that. Almost.
A kid. Well, if you think about the process I laid out, you're understanding somebody's story of where they are, whatever you're selling, and you're taking their story into consideration, and it becomes a sales talk when you think about it.
Mm.
It's a sales story. This is you. So it's them, us, we, right? Them as the prospect, us as the seller, and then we together, we wrap the story up. I agree 1,000%. So now I'm being a millennial, 1,000%. So,
So what I hear you saying is,
yes, you heard me. Yeah, definitely are listening to me. Thank you.
but yeah, it's the human to human term. I don't know where you got it from, but one of my a great friend who I've interviewed as well, Brian Kramer. I don't know if you'd wear it, but Brian Kramer is a big proponent of human to human, not B to C or B to B,
Yeah, he's
and that's where
right.
the power of story comes in, and that's why I'm a bit of a Joseph Campbell fanboy. The hero's journey, which was the story arc that built an incredibly successful movie franchise called Star Wars.
Yes,
Um,
it did. Yes, it did.
yeah, the funny thing about that, the power of those sort of stories, is they go right to the DNA of being human, um, and in essence, it's the call. In other words, someone who's ordinary gets the call. They have mentors along the way. They learn.
Yep.
They have pain. They have drama, and then they bring.
Suffering.
They're suffering.
Right, right.
They learn so much along the way, and then because of that learning, they become wise, and then they bring the last part of the story arc is they then bring back to share their gift with the world, and your gift obviously is basically the art and science of sales.
I think I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah,
Yeah, very well articulated.
yeah.
So thank you. Yeah, I think so.
And that's what you're passionate about. And this is what I think all our calling is, to try and discover why we're here on the planet.
You
And
put it in a you definitely packaged that correctly. That is, I couldn't have said it better myself. And it really is, because it's both. It's not one or the other. It's not the science of sales. It's not just art. It's a combo of those things.
I think all of us as humans have that call. Is whether you act on the call, is where the magic happens or it doesn't. And so for me, the most important thing in life is discover why you're here. In other words, that's discover why you're here. That's it, and then acting on that. But yeah, that's why I wanted to hear your story at the beginning. Is that why are you doing what you're doing today, Lance?
Yeah,
And you're obviously passionate about it. You read about it. You're learning about it. You're growing from it. Then you are transferring your gift to your team, and you're making a difference.
I appreciate you saying that. I do really, I like the signature you put on that, or I like my signature that you put on that. That was really well said. And I appreciate the opportunity to be on and share my story and learn about you. And it sounds like we have a lot in common with strategy and tactics, especially around listening. You and I are 1,000% on the same page with that.
Well, if you learn to be a listener, it will change your life. I can promise you that.
And others. Yeah, well said. Well
Okay,
said.
and it'll help you not just about winning sales. It'll also help you with dating.
Yeah, that's how I'm pretty sure that's how I landed Lisa, my wife. So I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure might have been my greatest sale.
yeah,
So
I'm sure it was. So, anything else you want to share in terms of what would your recommendation be to our listeners and viewers? What's the most important thing to be a great salesperson? What would be your top tips that will help them in making their business more successful, or or make their side hustle more
yeah,
successful?
I would say two things, and I'll land it the one into the other. I think Dr. Seuss said it well, and it summarized sales for me. He said, "You'll play lonely games too, games you can't win because they'll be against you." Right?
Mm.
I think when you sell or you're an entrepreneur, the toughest game you play is what's in your head. It really is, because you are trying to talk to people and engage with people that don't necessarily want to engage or talk to you. Right?
Yep.
I think that's number one. I think then the other thing is, and this is often overlooked. There's a word called enthusiasm, and enthusiasm in Latin, I believe, enthus is gift of the gods. I think in Greek, it's God from within. And then the last four letters of enthusiasm are AISM. And the acronym for that is I am sold myself. That's really what enthusiasm is. You're sold. You don't have to be a cheerleader, but are you sold yourself? Whatever you're doing, your side hustle, your business, your career, your brand, right? I
Mm.
said a younger salesperson said to me a couple of weeks ago, I'm not really excited about what I'm doing. I said, yeah, but you committed to the job. He goes, but I'm not excited about it. I go, are you excited about your career? And he goes, yeah. I go, then you can be excited about what you're doing, because you don't have to stay here forever, but you can be excited about your story. So follow through on what you promised, stop looking around, get the job done, and good things will happen. Don't chase money, chase what's right. So,
Yeah, I love that. Don't chase money.
right. Money follows, never leads.
Totally agree. I
Right.
think that's a great way to finish. Thanks, Lance, for sharing your
I
gift with the
appreciate it.
world.
Thank you.
And I learned so much from very clever people like yourself, and I am grateful to be able to do this and listen. So
Thank
thank
you,
you,
Joe.
Lance.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you.